Morning. We have Parshas Vayishlach. Vayishlach means and he sent, and the parsha opens up with Yaakov. One second, can I change the camera on here to zoom out a little? No. No, it'll have to do. So, Yaakov, after the 20 years working with Lavan, etc., he established his family that we talked about last week. Oh, thank you for that. Completely forgot about.
The blue ones?
No, there should be yellow, I think.
Yellow for your hair.
That's it.
Yeah.
So, he's heading back to Esav. He hears that Esav is coming towards him. He's heading back home, let's say. Okay, let's go back 2 weeks, Parshas, right? Yaakov, the reason that Yaakov left his home and went to Haran, went to Lavan, was in large part because he had gotten the blessings that Yitzchak had intended to give to Esav. Esav felt like he got jibbed, he was really angry, and he wanted to kill Yaakov. So Yaakov leaves, he goes to Haran to get away from Esav, and he goes there and he, gets married and establishes a family. He's there for 20 years. 20 years later, he's now heading back, and he's heading back towards home, where he's obviously going to have to deal with Esav. And on the way, he hears, Esav is coming towards him. He's got all of these people. He's coming effectively with an army. So Yaakov sends ahead messengers. Vayishlach Yaakov sent messengers ahead of him towards Esav. And he sends them with a message. And the message says, so shall you say to Esav, to my brother. And the opening words of his statement are, Im Lavan Garti. With Lavan I sojourned, which means I lived. Lagor means to dwell, but it's a very specific kind of living, and this is why that you'll see usually the English word that's used is sojourned. Garti, lagor, to dwell, to sojourn. The shoresh is ger. Ger means a foreigner. And so Yaakov, and so Rashi tells us, what does it mean? Why did Yaakov choose these words? What was he saying in Lavan Garti? So Rashi gives us two explanations. Number one, the first one is, Ger means a foreigner. Garti, I sojourned. And so he's telling him, I remained a foreigner. So he's telling his brother Esav, you've got nothing to be jealous about. I went there, I had some success, but I never became established. I never became, politically, influential. I was never even considered a permanent resident or a local. The whole time I was there, I was an outsider. I was a foreigner. I was a guest. And the second thing Rashi tells us about this word, why Yaakov chose this word, Garti specifically, is, if those letters look familiar, it might be because we often use those letters arranged a little differently. Taryag, we refer to the Taryag mitzvahs. The numerical value of the letter Tov is 400. Reish is 200. Yud is 10. Gimel is 3. Gives us a total of 613 mitzvahs. And so Yaakov chose to say Garti rather than any of the other words he could have used to say that I lived, I dwelled, etc. Because he's telling him, Im Lavan Garti, I lived with Lavan, V'taryag, and while I was there, I kept the 613 mitzvahs the whole time. Okay, and who thinks that Esav was very curious and couldn't sleep at night because he wondered whether or not Yaakov was keeping the 613 mitzvahs while he was hanging out with Lavan and living in Haran?
Sure, he was like, my brother's a giant nerd, he's going to be doing it anyway.
Or he just didn't even think about it, right? Most likely. Probably didn't particularly care. And also, so that's one thing. It's like, why is Yaakov telling this to Esav? Like, what's the likelihood that Esav cares? And perhaps more, it's not more important as a question, but where it's going to lead us is maybe even more important. And that is, if these are both interpretations of the same word, there has to be some sort of relationship between them. If they're both true, they're both real interpretations of the same word, they are both the truth of the same word, they are both real meaning of the same word, they have to be integrally related, fundamentally connected. So what's the connection between these two things? They seem like just two completely different messages. Neither has anything to do with the other one. Or maybe not so much. Right? If we stop and look really and stop and think about what this means, he says that I lived with Lavan, but while I was there, I remained a foreigner. What do you mean you remained a foreigner? You lived there for 20 years. Ultimately, what determines whether someone is a foreigner or a local? Well, maybe I should say it in the form of a question. What is it that determines whether someone is a foreigner or a local? Whether someone is a guest or visiting or whatever we want to call it, versus a local resident, someone who lives there, someone who's part of the community. Is it the amount of time that they've been there? It's definitely not the amount of time that they've been there. Right now, obviously in a legal system, that might be something that might be a factor in determining legally when someone becomes a permanent resident or a citizen or whatever, but that's technically maybe part of the process. But that's not the factor that determines whether someone in truth is a local or a guest. A local or a foreigner, let's say. A foreigner who's here. What's the difference? A local, what does it mean that someone's a local versus a foreigner? A foreigner means someone who is foreign, i.e. someone who is of another place, someone who is of a foreign place. We're not talking about someone who is in another place, because we're talking about someone who is here, who is a foreigner. Yaakov was living with Lavan in Haran, but he was a foreigner, which means he was present in that location, but he was not of that location. As opposed to being a local is someone who is of this location. Right? This is their home. When someone's a foreigner, this is not their home. This is the location in which they are currently found, present, but it's not their home. They are of another place. What does it mean that someone is of this place or someone is of another place? What determines that? What determines that is, and I don't know if it's more correct to say that there are a few aspects or components, or it's maybe just sort of different ways of really getting at the same thing. But either way, it's a person's, part of it's going to be a person's values. If someone comes from one place and then goes to another place that has very different values, as long as they live their life according to and they retain the values of the place that they came from, they are not of this place. They're a person whose values are not the values of this place. They're the values of the place that they came from. Is the person an integrated member of this society, culturally, socially. Right? Something that's really ultimately a detail that doesn't make or break anything, but it's a kind of thing that just can sort of give some degree of indication, a bit of a, almost like a symptom. Someone who hasn't really, let's say, adopted and adapted to the language of the place they moved to. They still, are functioning, operating their life, speaking almost exclusively in the language of the place that they came from, gives us a sense of the fact that they're not fully integrated, they haven't fully adapted, they're still of the mindset and living life the way that they lived or where they came from, and they are substantially, at least, if not mostly or entirely, of that place that they came from. As a person gets integrated into the society, into the culture, adopts the values, and really probably the thing that it boils down to, that if we had to, because all of these are sort of details. What's the thing that's going to be the determining factor? Is this person a local or is this person a foreigner? Is their perception of their relationship with this place. Do they see this place as home? Or do they see this as a place where I am right now? As long as they see as long as they perceive this place that they came from as being their home, and the place where they are now as a place where they are, but it's not home, then they are a foreigner. They are a person of another place, because to them, home is the other place, the place where they came from. When the person's relationship with these two places changes, and now they see the place where they are presently as home, this is, home to them, they've effectively become a local, right? And all those other things are going to go together with it. The integration into the culture, into the society, and the language, and all those things are going to come along with that. But the factor that is what determines, is this home? Are they local? Are they a foreigner? Is their relationship with this place? Is this place home? Is it not? And Yaakov, let's say, is telling Esav, ultimately, in Lavan Garti, while I was with Lavan, I kept those 613 mitzvahs. The numerical value of Garti is 613. And at the same time, Yaakov's also giving a very, very important message. And this is a message that's important to all of us. It's important to everyone, every day of everyone's life. And that is, how is it that Yaakov was able to be in the most morally bankrupt place in the world, doing business, and Yaakov was very, very deeply involved in business. He was running his own business. He did his own negotiating. He got his hands dirty, taking care of the sheep. He was deeply involved in the minutiae, in the details of every aspect of business. He was clearly a very shrewd businessman. How is it that someone's busy getting their hands dirty, taking care of sheep, and engaging in, very difficult business negotiations with difficult, immoral, bad people, and dealing with them and negotiating with them and transacting with them? And Yaakov was involved in all of this. And somehow, with all of these things, and he was living in a place with his family, raising his children in a place that was the diametric opposite of who he was and what he stood for and where he came from and what his values were. And somehow he managed to live there and be deeply involved without it taking any toll on his ability to keep the mitzvahs, the Taryag mitzvahs, all 613 of them. And that the secret to Yaakov's ability to do that is in Garti, the fact that he sojourned. He says, I was there, but the whole time I was there, I was perceived as a stranger. Why was he perceived as a stranger? Because he perceived himself as a stranger. His perception of his relationship with the place, and it's not just his perception, his relationship with Haran was that of a stranger. I lived there, I was involved in the economy, deeply involved in the economy, became a very, very successful businessman, was, very involved in the society, but all of the time in which Yaakov was involved in the society, and all of the negotiations that he entered into, and all the ways in which he was involved, all of those were done to him. He saw himself as a stranger the whole time. He was a foreigner. He never got comfortable. He never saw this as home. He never saw this as his culture. He never saw this as his society. And this is true both of the culture and the society, and it's true of his assets, of the business itself. Yaakov was deeply involved in business. Yaakov generated tremendous profit. He accumulated incredible assets, became very, very, very wealthy. But all of that to him was something that he was a stranger to. There are some people who can, and this is true of anything, but let's say in the context of business, there are some people, they walk into a business meeting, into a boardroom, into a negotiation, and it's like they've come home, right? They're in their element. This is who they are. This is what they were born for. And the minute they walk into that room, they've come home. That's their comfort zone. They were made for it. And then you'll have people who maybe are very effective and capable and shrewd and all of those things. They walk into the boardroom, they walk into the meeting, they walk into the negotiation, and they don't really want to be there. It's not who they are. It's not their comfort zone. They don't feel like they were born for this and they've come home. They feel like this is something that they have to do because it's something that they have to do. But they don't feel at home. They feel like they're there just because they have to be. That's got nothing necessarily to do with how successful they're going to be, how effective they are, how competent and capable they are, necessarily. Is it true that if you were to look at 1,000 of each type of people, on average, the people who really feel at home and feel like, this is what they were born for and this is who they are likely going to have a higher average rate of success and competence? I would guess probably yes, just because it's the personality type and the things are going to come along with it. That's my guess. It's my guesstimate. But they're not the same thing. They don't necessarily go hand in hand. A person can be very much not at home. A person can be someone who maybe really just likes to sit at home on the couch with a book. But they're also running a business, or they have a job and they have to go and do these things. And maybe they're very, very good at it, but they're doing it. They're good at it and they're doing it because this is what they have to do. But it's not because it's who they are or where they feel at home. And that was Yaakov the whole time. And it's not only the business and the transactions and the negotiations and the meetings and all of that. It's even the assets themselves. Again, is there going to be a substantial correlation between people whose values and priorities are material assets and people who accrue a lot of material assets? Probably. If you took people and ranked them according to how much they value and prioritize material assets, and then you took the same group of people and ranked them according to how much they accrued in terms of having material assets, there's definitely going to be a substantial correlation. But it doesn't necessarily always go hand in hand. And this is in both directions, right? There are people who highly value and prioritize material assets and they're just not very good at getting them. But you'll also have people who accrue tremendous material assets, and it's not necessarily because they value them highly or prioritize them. Sometimes it's just kind of the way things worked out. It's the way they just sort of landed on their feet in life, or where the circumstances took them, or sometimes it could happen that maybe there's someone who is not particularly interested in material assets and business and becoming wealthy, but maybe they're gifted and very capable at it, and maybe their mentor or their Rav or their Mashpi or something tells them that for whatever reason, all things considered, maybe the way that they can make the greatest impact in the world or maximize the expression of their soul or whatever it is, maybe all of the above, for this particular person is to go into business and to be extremely successful and generate tremendous profit and then use it for the right things. That can be a real thing too. So you could have someone who's tremendous but can become very, very wealthy, but that the material assets, the wealth is not home for them. This is not what they prioritize. It's not what they value. And this was Yaakov. Yaakov went in and he, negotiated brutally with Lavan and became extremely wealthy as a result of those negotiations and as a result of his hard work. And Yaakov worked very hard. Yaakov worked very hard because it's almost just a matter of self-respect. If someone's going to do something, do it properly. It just as a matter of respect for oneself and respect for what one's doing, and it's almost like if someone's doing something and they're not doing it properly, they're doing it half-heartedly, it's almost like it's bal tashchis, it's a waste. If you're doing it, do it properly. Respect yourself and respect you're doing. Respect the time that you're spending on it, that you make use of the time and make the time be used effectively. So Yaakov was working. He worked hard and he did his job and he did what he set out to do and he did it very effectively and he put in a lot of effort. But it was never where his heart was at. That was never home to him. That was never what he valued. He was doing it, he did it properly and he succeeded, but that was never what life was about for him. What was life about for Yaakov? What life was about for Yaakov was, and we sort of touched on this last week, what life was about for Yaakov was his connection to the infinity of the Creator, his connection to his purpose, the realization of his purpose, making use of his time, being spiritually connected, creating a legacy, right? And we talked about the two, Yaakov's biological legacy and Yaakov's spiritual legacy. Yaakov's biological progeny, his family. Yaakov built and raised in Haran a large family that gave him a lot of nachas, and all of them lived true to his values. And so what was important to him was his literal biological children and his spiritual offspring, his impact on the world, the integration of divinity into the world, into everything he touched, into everything he came into contact with, into every place he found himself in, into every person he interacted with. And the Baal Shem Tov says that because everything is hashgacha pratis, nothing happens by chance, any place a person finds them in at any time is obviously, by definition, necessarily a place in which they are supposed to be. Which means there is a reason why they're there. And it's a good idea to frequently ask ourselves, what might be the reason that I'm here? What's a way that I can make an impact? What's something I can do to make a difference? To make my presence in this place worthwhile? And that was how Yaakov looked at every second, every minute, every day, every encounter. Everything was an opportunity to achieve, an opportunity to integrate divinity into the world. That was Yaakov's priority. That was Yaakov's home. That was what Yaakov was thinking about, right? Imagine someone who, maybe let's take a similar but different example to Yaakov. Someone who goes somewhere for 20 years to work and to make money. And they go there because financially, economically, there's a really good opportunity. But as far as they're concerned, they're not moving there. They're planning to go home with the money that they accrue. And maybe they're even sending money back home to their family while they're there, because the reason they went there was to make money for the people they love and care about and want to support. What are they thinking of? Now, on one hand, the person is going to be working hard and they're going to be putting in effort and trying to generate as much income, as much revenue, as much profit as they can, because that's what they're there for, because there's an opportunity to do that. But at no point are they going to get distracted and forget about the family at home that they're sending the money to, which is the whole reason they came here in the first place. Right? In life, it's part of human nature, and this is going to vary very much from person to person. There's a very wide range of the extent to which this happens, but I think it's something that everybody is susceptible to a substantial degree. Some people it's substantial and some people it's extreme. And that is, all of us have our primary objective. We have our primary mission, our primary values, the things that we're working on, the things that are important, the things that we care about. And the reality is, our primary values, our primary objectives are always going to have secondary things that we have to get involved in as a means to an end. Someone wants to make money, they've got to go to work. Right? How many people are going to work because they want to go to work? And the evidence of that, or the indication, the way to measure that would be if they go to work even though they don't get paid, or they would go to work even if they wouldn't get paid. And not as a means to an end, not because it's an internship and they're hoping to get hired at the end, or it's a way to build up their resume. They're going to work because they want to go to work, period. That's it. Very small minority, if anyone. Right? People primarily, why do people go to work? Because people need money to live. How do you get money? You go to work, you run a business, you do a job, you get paid, whatever it is. So what are people interested in primarily when they're going to work generally? The money. But if a person goes to work and all they think about is the paycheck, and they're not thinking about the work, probably if it's a job, they're probably not going to keep the job for very long. And if it's a business, the business is not going to be nearly as successful as it would be if they would immerse themselves in the details of the business, of the work. In order to make the money, a person does have to get involved in the work. So the reality is that we do need to get involved in things that are secondary to our primary objective, things that are secondary to our primary value. Anything we want to achieve generally involves us doing things other than the actual thing we want. There's always a means that we have to engage in order to achieve the end that we want. And it's not uncommon that people do get lost in the means and forget about the end. Right? On one hand, it's generally going to be somewhat necessary to be involved in the means, involved in the process, and focused on the process, and not just thinking about the end. But if a person gets so immersed in the process that they forget about the end, they forget about the objective, that can also go very south. Right, a person who's, let's say, doing this job, they traveled somewhere to get a job so they could make money to support the people back home that they care about, or they've started a business that they have the potential to do really well at because they want to make money, or they go to work and they have a job in order to make a salary, and they get completely lost in the job, completely lost in the business, completely lost in the work, and forget about the people at home that they came to support and they came to do the job to make money for in the first place, or they forget about the paycheck and get so immersed in the work they forget about the profit that they started the business to generate and just get completely immersed in the minutiae of the business. That can go obviously very badly as well, right? And so this is the balance that Yaakov maintained, was that he got his hands dirty, he got involved, and if he was going to be running a business, he was going to do it properly. He wasn't going to waste his time. He wasn't going to disrespect himself and his time and the opportunity that Hashem gave him by engaging in something and doing it subpar, not doing it all the way. He did it properly. But at the end of the day, Yaakov retained clarity and focus on what his values were. Yaakov generated tremendous wealth. He had the opportunity to do so, and he did. But the wealth was never a primary value to Yaakov. The wealth was never what Yaakov actually cared about. The material wealth, the material assets. The thing that was important to Yaakov the whole time, and he never lost focus on this, was the realization of his potential, the realization of his purpose, creating a legacy, a biological legacy, a spiritual legacy, integrating divinity into the world, into every place that he found himself in, into every person that he encountered and interacted with, into every object that he interacted with. These were Yaakov's values, and he never forgot them. And so even when he was in the boardroom having a negotiation with Lavan. And he was getting very detailed into, they were going through and they were fighting over the fine print and over all the details. Yaakov got very much involved in every specific, minute detail. But even as he did so, he was a stranger to that. That was not his home. That was not his values. His home, even while he was at work, people will use expressions like this to indicate someone who maybe, forgot their primary objective or their primary values and got a little too carried away. And people will say, oh, this person basically just moved into work, right? This person lives at the office. Generally speaking, now sometimes if someone's, hiring and they want a worker who's over the top dedicated, they might see that as a positive when they hear, oh my goodness, this person lives at the office. But most of the time, most people who are saying someone lives at the office, it's not generally perceived as a, at least entirely, if not primarily, positive thing. Now, obviously there are exceptions to this, etc. A person could have a job where they're involved in, and they're committed to the cause of helping people, of making the world a better place, and they live at the office because they're so dedicated and committed to having this impact that they don't stop. Fine, that's a very specific case, and maybe that's to some degree an exception of the rule, potentially, if the person can handle it and still, for a lot, just about everyone, or everyone to varying degrees, that's not going to be sustainable even if the intention's good. But generally speaking, when a person lives at the office, what it means is they prioritize work over whatever it is that they have outside of work. Certainly if someone has a family and they live at the office and they never see their family, it's probably let's say their prioritization of their values is one that most people would not consider healthy. For work to be home is generally not a positive thing. Certainly in Yaakov's case, for work with Lavan in Haran to be home is not a positive thing. For someone's material assets and wealth to be home, to be where their heart is really at, to be the thing that they're comfortable. A person's more comfortable and feels more at home when they're doing their accounting, looking at their bank account, or doing a negotiation or selling something and making some money. If they feel more comfortable and present and at home there than they do when they're with their family, maybe it's time for them to take a step back and reassess their values. And this is the thing that determines whether one is a foreigner or whether one is a local, whether one is of this place or of another place, is ultimately, really, it's what are their values? What's their primary value? What's the thing that they feel at home? And at home doesn't necessarily just have to be a place, right? A person can be in the same place and do two different things. And one of those things, when they engage in that activity, they feel like they've come home, and in the other activity, they don't. Right? A home doesn't just have to be a physical location. It can be, in these days, the word space is used a lot more flexibly and loosely. And perhaps in a sense, part of it is to indicate this, that a space can talk about, there are cultural spaces and there are professional spaces and spaces of influence, etc. A person can be comfortable in a circumstance or when involved in an activity or a group of people. All of those things could be a space in which one feels at home. Right? Now, at home indicates some degree of being comfort, but it's a lot more than comfort, right? When a person says, oh, this feels like home. What does a person mean when they say this feels like home? Comfort is a big part of that, but you know what it is? What's the thing that makes a person feel comfortable that would make them say this feels like home or this is home? It's feeling like this is where they belong, right? When you walk in somewhere and you feel like this is where you belong, this is home. And it feels comfortable because one feels that they belong. So Yaakov was involved in business that was never where he belonged as far as he was concerned. Yaakov was very successful in business and became very wealthy. The assets and the business part of his life was not where he belonged. Saying that it was not where he belonged doesn't mean he shouldn't have been there and he shouldn't have been involved in those things and he shouldn't have done them. But it means that's not the space within his life in which he felt and said, this is where I belong. This is home. This is where I'm comfortable. This is where I'm going to go when I need to feel at home. To Yaakov, that was always his primary values. And Yaakov was telling this to Esav, and he was telling it to us. Yaakov was telling Esav and us, Im Lavan Garti, I was in Haran. For 20 years I lived there. And I was very involved in the economy. I was very involved in business. I accrued tremendous material assets and tremendous material wealth. But all of that time and in all of those activities and in relationship with all of those assets and things, Garti, the whole time, I was a stranger to that. I was a foreigner. I was a foreigner to the culture. I retained my own values and my own culture. I was a foreigner to the society. I was a foreigner in those business negotiations. I did them very well to the best of my ability, but I was a foreigner. That wasn't home to me. That wasn't where I belonged. That wasn't where I was comfortable. And I accrued material assets, and those assets also were not home to me. Right? And there's an expression, is it the Maggid, I think? Is it your Maggid? Talks about how it's uses effectively, I mean, without saying it in these words, but the metaphor that he uses and then he talks about is, he was talking about having a humble home, right? People came into his home and his home was very humble, very, very humble. We're talking like sleeping on the floor. Sorry?
The onion?
What about the onion?
When he talks about becoming an onion.
Oh, is that? No, I think that's a different.
Are you talking about sharing chassidus and becoming?
Yeah, humble.
Yeah. No, here I'm talking about financially humble.
That was the metaphor already.
Yeah. So he had a very humble home. We're talking sleeping on the floor, like effectively no possessions, very basic, minimal food. And people came to him and looked at him and were like, why does your house look like this? Why would you have like such a bare home? And so he said, when we're at home, right, people like to furnish their homes. If you're traveling, if you're renting a place, imagine, right, I'll give an example to illustrate. If someone, finally at some whatever point in their life it happens, they buy their dream home, they've been saving up for 20 years and they finally manage to buy the home of their dreams and they can't wait to move in, but they have some work to do and they have to renovate and fix it up and furnish and all of that, and it's going to take 6 months. So they rent a place to live in for 6 months while they're working on the home. If the place that they're renting doesn't have beds and doesn't have doorknobs on the closets, etc., is the person likely to get a bed that's comfortable that they can sleep on and get some doorknobs so they can open the closets without having to work too hard? Probably. How much attention is the person likely to pay and how much time are they going to spend and how much money are they going to invest when they choose a bed that they're buying for the home that they just bought, that they're living in for the next 50 years or 30 years or however long, versus how much time and effort and money they're going to invest when they buy the bed for the house where they're living for the next 6 months. And what about the doorknobs? And etc., all the things, whatever things, they're going to furnish the place that they're living in for 6 months, but they're not going to likely not going to spend as much money. They're likely going to spend much less emotional energy and time deciding and picking out the perfect one and caring which one it is, in contrast to the home that they just bought that they're going to move into, where a person's likely to put much more time and effort and emotional energy into choosing all of the right details, exactly the ones that they want and the best ones that they want, the ones they like the best and going to be the most comfortable and look the best, etc., and create the best environment. Why? Because one of them is the home where they're going to live permanently, and one of them is a place they're in for all. Yes, it should be functional, and yes, it should be comfortable. But you don't have the same priority. You don't prioritize, and you're not going to invest the same way. And so the Maggid said, yes, in one's home, one tends to invest time and effort and resources to furnishing and making it nice and comfortable and pleasant and beautiful. In a temporary place where one is just traveling, passing through, or just living there for a period of time, it's temporary. You don't put in the same effort and the same resources. And so he said, this home where I live, I mean, in terms of his physical life as a person, as a human being in a physical body, this was his permanent home. But to him, the whole material, the whole life of his soul in his body as a human in this layer of reality was only a short part of the journey to him. To him, he was just traveling. He was on his way somewhere. To him, home is divinity. Home is connection to the Creator. Home is the realization of purpose. So to him, his whole relationship with his physical house, with his dwelling it was functional. And he put all of his efforts into furnishing his spiritual home, into spiritual furnishings, into things that had real purpose and meaning to him. And this is the same idea that we see with Yaakov. Yaakov said, I'm a stranger here. 20 years is a long time to be a stranger. But at the end of the day, stranger, foreigner versus local, it's a matter of mindset. It's a matter of integration. It's a matter of assimilation, of adopting the priorities and the values and the culture. And Yaakov never adopted those priorities. Yaakov retained his own values, his own priorities, and to just all things material, he was a stranger. He was a foreigner. He was there, he was involved, but he was involved as an outsider, as a foreigner. And because he retained that clarity on his values, on his priorities, he was able to, because Garti, he was a stranger the whole time, he saw himself as a foreigner to the material and to these things. Therefore, Garti, he was able to keep the 613 mitzvahs the whole time. Because life is full of distractions. Maybe distractions isn't quite the right word for what I was trying to say, but we are all going to have to engage with in many things in life that are not our primary value, that are not our primary objective. If we get caught up in those things and get lost, and those things become home, those become the things where we're comfortable, and we become a local to those things, you can only be a local in one place. When a person becomes a local in one place, that what happened is they used to see themselves as a local to their prior home and as a foreigner here. Now they've become a local here. By definition, they're not going to be a local to the place that they came from to the same degree. It means they've let go of seeing that as their home, and now they see this as their home. Can a person have multiple homes? Yeah. But they're not all going to be home to the same extent. And so the moment a person makes something that's not really their home and allows that to become their home, then the thing that really is or was or should be their home is now not their home necessarily to the same degree. So getting caught up in the things that are secondary, and being caught up is a state of mind. A person can be very, very much involved in things that are secondary as far as they're concerned. But as long as they're very involved as a foreigner, they're very involved with the clarity that this is a means to an end. These are not my primary values. These are not my primary priorities. I'm doing it. I'm going to do it properly. I'm not going to waste anyone's time or effort or anything else. I'm going to do it well. But I'm doing it with the understanding and the clarity of that it is secondary and that my primary values are what they are, and what's home to me is still home to me, and to me this is all something I'm engaged in as a foreigner who is local to my home, to my values, to my true values. If we can retain the clarity, we can get involved in all kinds of things as necessary without getting caught up in them, without getting lost, without becoming a local. The moment that we lose the clarity and focus and we become a local, that's the moment where we can start to lose the emphasis on the things that really are our primary values. Had Yaakov allowed himself to become a local to Haran, a local to the culture and society of Lavan, a local to the pursuit of material wealth, then Garti, Taryag Mitzvahs probably would have gone at least somewhat down the drain. Now, down the drain sounds very strong, but he would not have maintained the same level of achievement and emphasis on the mitzvahs that were his true primary value had he allowed himself to become a local to Haran, to become a local to the pursuit of material wealth, etc. And so really, if we're going to boil all of this down, it is a person might need to be, Yaakov needed to be in that place. Yaakov needed to be involved in the business of shepherding, let's say. Had he become a local to those things, it would have taken away from his true values, from his Taryag Mitzvahs. But because he made sure that as involved as he was with his hands, with his feet, even with his mind, but that involvement was always the involvement of a foreigner, the involvement of someone who's not here because this is really where they want to be. They're not here because this is who they are and where they're really comfortable. They're here because functionally they have to be here. As long as one can retain that mindset of a foreigner, one can be involved without getting lost. That's the key. The key to, and every one of us is going to have to be involved in many things throughout the course of our life that are not our primary value, that are not our primary objective. And there will be secondary ones and tertiary ones and quaternary ones, and there are ones that seem like they're like 100 steps removed from our primary value. And you know what? Sometimes in life things go that way. Sometimes in life we need to be involved in something that seems like we can't lost count of how many steps it is removed from the thing that we ultimately care about. Sometimes it happens. And when that happens, it's possible to get lost and caught up in those things, which will, by definition, come at the cost of our primary values, but it doesn't have to. We can get involved in the things we have to get involved in. Just remember that this is not home. We are a foreigner. I am involved in this activity. I am a foreigner to this activity. A foreigner, by definition, indicates two things. That the person's not of this place, but that they are here. Right, when I was, let's say, in Australia, I wasn't a foreigner in America because I wasn't here. It was just like not a conversation. I happened to be a citizen of the US, but if I wasn't, it's the moment that I come here that I'm a foreigner, which means two things. I am not of this place, but I am in this place. If I'm neither of this place or in this place, I'm not a foreigner, I'm just not here. Right? So Yaakov, in saying that I was sojourning, I was there as a foreigner, that doesn't, it's not just be involved in those things as little as possible, try to avoid them, try not to be involved if at all possible, because that's not life. We are going to have to, inevitably, every one of us is going to have to be involved in many things that are not directly part of our primary values. But we can be a foreigner. We can be present in something, but not of that thing. The same way you can be present in a place, but not of that place. And if we can do that, if we can retain the clarity, what are our primary values? What is home? What is the location, the space, the activities, the values, the purpose that is home to me? The place where I belong, the environment in which I belong, the activities in doing which I belong, the values to which I belong. And if we retain clarity on those, and we're anchored to them, then we can get involved in other things as necessary when we have to, and we will have to, and make sure that, yes, I'm involved in these things as a foreigner, as a stranger, which means I'm present in them, but I'm not of them. And as long as we can do that, we can remain anchored in, because the foundation of being able to be of not becoming a local is to retain. I mean, think about a person who goes somewhere, and maybe someone goes somewhere, and let's say they're going there for work or for whatever it is, and they're going to be there for a long time. And before they go, they're saying to themselves, you know what? The person's proud and patriotic, and they don't ever want to become a local of that place. But the reality is, like, you live somewhere for 20 years, like, good luck not becoming a local. What's something the person could do to help reduce the chances of them becoming a local? Make sure that they make regular times to remember where they come from and how valuable it is to them, to celebrate, to commemorate, to recall, to visualize the place that they came from and how important and valuable that is to them. And that's going to remind them, right, don't get too caught up in this. Right? That's the foundation. The foundation is the clarity on what our true values are. What is it that really is home to us? What is it to which we really belong? Then being anchored to that can allow us to travel to the places, the spaces, get involved in things that we need to be involved in, the spaces we need to be involved in, and to be there and to do what we need to do, but to make sure that we continue to be a stranger in that place, in that environment, in that activity, in that value. We're in them, but we're not of them. And that can allow us to continue to stay true to what our values really are. So Yaakov said both of these things. They're not two alternative interpretations of the pasuk. They're two parts of the same thing. It's a means and an end. It's a process and an outcome. The process is, Garti, I remained a foreigner. I was in the place, but I was never of the place. I was in the culture, I was never of the culture. I was in the business, but I was never of the business. And because of that, Taryag Mitzvah Shamati, I was able to stay true to who I really am and what my true values really are, and to keep the 613 mitzvahs the same way that I kept them before. Have a good one.